business then. 50% of the listings in St. Louis were selling. And I started doing pretty well by doing a lot of lead generation, a lot of aggressive follow-up, and throwing away all the garbage. Like, you could want to sell your house, but if you weren't motivated and absolutely have to sell, great. You're a FSBO and you're going to be a jerk about it. I gave them to my biggest competitor at RE/MAX, and I would tell him, call David Kurz. He is a perfect fit for you. My coach was like, you're out of your mind. I said, you watch, Debbie. He will do less business in the next 12 months than he did in the last 12 months. And I took his business down by 40% because I loaded him up with garbage. They would call up Shane from RE/MAX.
He's your friend?
What's that? What's that?
She said, he's your friend? No, I'm just kidding.
It wasn't me. It wasn't me. I was in.
No, it was Shane Sowers from RE/MAX in St. Louis. And he worked FSBOs. So I'm like, I think in your market, you're a little bit further out. I'd make up whatever story, and I would say, Shane is probably the perfect fit for you. I'd love to work with you, but you're out in Chesterfield Valley. I focus more in the western part of St. Louis County. Let me give you his number. And I would do it based on motivation. So I started having people shadow me. First mistake they made, because I told them, I'm in the office at 7 a.m. You can come as early as you want. I start at 7:30. What time do you think most of them show up? 8:30. 8:30 or 9? They come in, and they sit down, and they'd be like, all right, what are you going to do? I said, I already booked 4 listing or 5 listing appointments. They're like, what? I go, I did it between 7:30 and sometimes 8:10. I used a dialer. I had my list ready. I did nothing but that. Cell phone went away. I got on the dialer. I was done. Like, what else are you going to do? I'm going on listing appointments. I'm going to requalify my listings, and I'm going to cancel 6 out of 10. You're going to do what? I'm getting rid of the garbage. I'm going to send them to Shane or other people I don't like. Brand new to residential real estate, 3 years later, 240 transactions. I was the number 3 realtor in the market. Wow. People that shadowed me walked away and they're like, I can't figure this out. He doesn't do anything. Right? They're like, I don't get it. I showed up at your office at 8:30 and you're sitting there chatting with us. I'm like, well, I've already done all my business. All my lead gen's done. Here's my 5 or 6 leads I'm chasing this week for listing opportunities from today. I'm going to qualify them. I'm going to go on listing appointments. They're like, well, how many hours a week do you work? Not as many as you are. I don't do anything else. All I did was lead gen, lead follow-up, and go on listing appointments. I was a listing agent. I'm not saying that you have to be that way, but just stop doing it. And I'm not going to pick on anybody. My to-do list only had 4 things on it. If it wasn't one of those 4 things, I didn't do it. I figured out how to have somebody else do it. That's all I did.
Work smarter, not harder.
This is not an overcomplicated business. I talked to more people. It got so bad that at my brokerage at the time, the operating principal for the other market center came over to talk to the operating principal at my market center. He's got to be giving it away. He's doing something wrong. Nobody's ever come to our market and done this. Demanded to want to see my listing agreements. He walked away and went, no, he's taking full fees. There's nothing here. And shook his head and it's like, I can't figure this out. Well, he didn't show up at 7 o'clock in the morning to watch what was really going on. So let's transition to market, right? What do you hear today about the market? Shifting, there's a bubble, rates are going up, buyers are going away. Who here is confident that you know what's really going on in the market? No? I see a lot of heads shaking back and forth. Can you talk about the buy side of the business differently than the sell side? Do you know what the numbers are that support all the nonsense that's out there? Right? Because what do most people see? Media. What do 90% of the media articles do? They scare you. They take national numbers, and what do at the local level? They try and apply the national numbers to the local market. Is that right? Do they separate the buy side from the listing side? They separate the luxury properties from the ones that are at the median? So when I started in St. Louis, 55% of the listings were not selling. That meant half of the listings. So now you probably get a good idea, because I knew my numbers, why I discarded so many listing opportunities. Because if you didn't know exactly what was happening, and at the luxury price point, above 750 in St. Louis, there were 167 active listings. How many pendings do you think there were?
107.
For the entire county of St. Louis, there's 4 million people in St. Louis. Do you want a listing above 750,000 in that market?
No.
First thing I did, because I bought a brokerage, is I took every luxury listing agent and I went through the numbers with them. And I got them to stop working on that. I'd be like, let all the competitors. There's hundreds of agents chasing luxury listings. Because not only were there 3 pending, how many do you think sold in the previous 6 months?
Maybe.
About 17. Over 6 months. How many agents do you think can make a living in luxury properties in that kind of a market? You can't. You need to know those numbers. I'm going to get through, David, the tool that we used to use so you can apply it in your local market. So why do you need to know this stuff? Because the velocity of the listing market is very different than the velocity of the buyer market. The mortgage people don't know this. How often do you have to reapprove and rerun the numbers and give people bad news in a market where rates are rising? Every week. What happens when you tell somebody rates went up? They went down a little bit, but rates changed. Right. They were looking at 700,000 in Miami-Dade. They're not looking at 700,000 in Miami-Dade anymore. How fast do they stop potentially looking? Somebody puts a property on the market as a seller. How long does that normal process take?
Seller is fast.
Well, they could be fast, or they're like Will and he wants to fix things up and get it perfect, get it photographed, get a drone shot of it, right? It's longer. And he already wants to move. That is a much longer cycle. They wait longer. They start beating you up as the agent. They move at 2 different clock speeds. So where do you need to look first to see what's really happening in the market? Buy side, listing side. Where are you going to see the first movement when the market starts to stall and go sideways? Now, if I went to your market and talked to agents, who has an idea about how you can capture that buyer size for the pool? How many buyers you have at a price point? Would you be able to explain that to a seller? Or would you have a concept of how to do this? Most agents didn't. I couldn't figure it out at first. Remember, I was brand new. The only people I knew in St. Louis were real estate agents. And I didn't know the market. I just moved there. Anybody want to take a guess at how you tell what's happening in the buy side?
Days on market?
No? That's lagging.
Okay.
It's a good guess. Most people, that's the most common answer. Why are NIR numbers garbage? Because they give you days on market, months of inventory, and they're a quarter behind at least. She called that buyer 145 days ago and told them bad news. They decided not to buy. So you're not going to see that part of it from NAR or your local board for at least a quarter. Next guess? And I'll tell you the answer in a second. Anybody else want to guess? It's so simple when we figure this out that it's counterintuitive. Anthony, you want to guess? He's shaking his head at me. He's shaking his head at me like this is like, okay?
Reduction in price.
I mean, like something I would judge is like what's actively in the market. But
Right,
Or maybe rental rates.
right. What does NAR also put out? The pending number, right? What's wrong with the pending number? That's just like a number at some point in time. What if we went, because I looked at 5 different ways to look at this, and just kept it simple. How many pendings overall in the market and in a price point went pending in the last 30 days? Think about a bucket of water. What are buyers doing? They're coming in and going pending, and they do one of 2 things. They fall out or they close. So if I roll that forward and I pull it every week at $500,000 price point, and I had 500 of them in that price point, and I go a week later, and now I've got 400 of them. Buyer pool increasing or decreasing? Decreasing. I let less people in pending status. So if they're going in faster, because some of them are going to close, some of them are going to fall out, and the number's going down. Now there's some seasonality to it, but if you do it over time, you track this number, what happens a year later? I can not only tell you, for this week, in this market, in this price point, there should be 400 buyers pending. What if there's 600? Stronger market than last year in the spring or summer? If you do this right, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, CNBC, and the rest of the media stopped calling the Board of Realtors. I got a call from the president of the Board of Realtors screaming at me. Because they're like, why are they not calling us anymore? I'm like, because you guys don't have a clue. All you say is, these are the days on market. This is how many pendings we have. This is how many months of inventory we have. I'm like, you guys are clueless. Yes, Anthony.
So would you consider that like an absorption rate for potential buyers?
Well, you can translate it into months of inventory and all that. I just want to know, is it shrinking? Is it going bigger? What's going on? And then if you track this over time, you can get really good at understanding what's going on in your market. You're looking for directional information.
So you're saying, just to, I guess, have a little bit more clarity, you're saying to look at the pending in comparison to what's closed?
No.
through time?
Yeah, I go into my MLS.
Pending in comparison.
So I just take the date range. I'm pulling it today. Today's the 15th, right? I want 30 days. I go to the 15th of last month and say, how many went pending? A week later, I pull I pull all the price ranges in my market. And I have a spreadsheet that I'll share with David's seen it. I think you already have it. You can do this, it doesn't matter if you're in Stellar, Miami Realtors, it doesn't matter if you're in Virginia. You want to know this because you want to know, is it increasing or decreasing? So Jen, all I do is I take a date range, 30 days. I looked at 60 days, I looked at 45 days. 30 was the most accurate. Even though things take longer than that to close. That's your buy side. It's literally that simple. So I looked at two things. Number pending on a weekly basis, and I would divide it into the active listings and get my pending ratio. What percentage? So if you're over in, because we just polled this, and David looked at it for Miami, we looked at it for the Venice, Sarasota area for a group of agents. What do you think the pending ratio was below the median price? It's about 6 weeks ago in Sarasota, Manatee. For those of you that are in Florida, like that 200 to 250 or 200 to 300,000 range.
78?
349%. Is that a hot market?
Sounds like it.
Yeah. What do you think it was if I went to $1 million? It's 109%. Still good. What do you think it was in St. Louis when only 55% of the listings were selling?
50%.
It was slightly higher than that. It was about 65%. Can you start to get an idea about price range and whether it's hot or not hot? Do you think having these numbers at hand and tracking them over time is great to share with prospective sellers so that when they have agent Kevin come in that's clueless and they say, well, how's the market? How's it in our price range? And I'm like, it's shifting. Seems like it's slowing down. It's moderating. Well, what does that mean? And then David Curtis walks in and he says, we're up at 137%. This is how many went pending in the last 30 days. Here's what it looks like at the price range that's double this. Here's what it looks like at the price range well below us. So we're kind of right in the middle. The market's still pretty healthy. This is what the number was 3 months ago. It's going down. There were 175 more pendings on a 30-day basis 90 days ago. Go ahead.
You take the number pending weekly and divide it by what?
30 days. 30. No. I take 30 days worth of pendings. So what you do in the MLS is you put the date range. We'll just do the hypothetical for today. May 15th, or actually June 15th. Sorry, I gotta get myself in the right month. To July 15th. That's how many deals went pending in a price range in the last 30 days.
He checks it every week, so every week.
Yeah.
So you can see
Yeah.
the movement. Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
That- On the MLS, it'll actually be a little easier.
It's really easy doing the
But
MLS. Most
just
MLSs
30 days,
allow you to do
but
is, and I just paid somebody eventually to go in every Monday, go in every price range and have the spreadsheet, and David will get this to you, total at the bottom. So I knew the pending ratios. I could just walk into a seller. Do you think this would help with buyers? It works great with buyers. Because the other stuff I have in there is, in a 6-month period, how many sold and how many expired. That helps with sellers. Like those luxury properties, not only were there 3 pending, but in a 6-month period, there were 17 that sold. How many do you think that expired? Anyone want to guess?
How many were pending?
3?
Out of 101?
3 out of 167?
Five.
5 expired or 5 sold?
Oh, no, almost all of them.
Yeah. There were close to 500 expireds. Who wants to work that market? Who can explain to a seller, only the sellers that absolutely have to sell are going to sell? You're competing with 167 people, most of which are never going to sell. So, Jen, if you're absolutely moving to Dallas, do you think we need to price super aggressively so that when they're looking, and we'll look at the local market for you, but do we need to be well below everything that's active to have the hope that we're the next one that sells? Because only 3 in the whole county have sold. It changes the dynamic of the conversation. The other stuff that I had on the spreadsheet was the standard stuff, list to sell. It helps with buyers, it helps with sellers. What do sellers say if they don't really get it? They don't sell that often. I don't want to give it away, right? You can show them for all the properties that sold, this is what the list to sell was for the whole county. It's 102% like it was when we pulled the numbers in Sarasota, Manatee. Nobody's giving it away. You can show them how many expired in their price range overall in the market. So you can talk about relative strength and price range, relative strength of what's going on as the buyer pool increasing or decreasing, specifically in their price range. And then you pull local comps to tie it down to, here's what we should do. This got to be such a good conversation that I would say to Jen after going through this, and I'd show her the stuff, based on these comparables and the fact that we looked at where it was 90 days ago, where it is now, and the market's down 15% in terms of the buyer size for the pool, how much below the comp from 65 days ago do you think we should price? She'd price it lower than I thought I wanted to price it, because she's absolutely moving to Dallas. And if Will says, oh man, I've got screwed in deck, I've got all this great stuff, and I say to Will, do you need to move? No, if I don't get my price, I'm not going to move. He goes to Shane Sowers at Remax. I don't want anything to do with him. I'm going to go lead Jen and follow up and find the next Jen. So not every seller is a good opportunity. Not every buyer is a good opportunity.
So you're saying that, Kevin, so if I want to sell my house for $500,000 and you come up to me with all your spreadsheet, you show me as a seller, you're going to tell me to price a little low. It depends on how, if I'm really motivated.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I'm going to decide if I'm going to work with you. So think about the difference in the dynamic there. I'm going to decide if I'm going to work with her based on what? Her motivation and timing? Nothing else. What is the number one thing I hear from agents about opportunities?
Waste time.
No. What do you guys get sad about? What do you tell each other? I got a listing opportunity. It's $800,000. Oh my God, this is a great property. And then I'll say, hey, Will, that sounds cool. You got somebody in Coral Gables, it's $1.2 million. Where are they moving? Do they absolutely have to move? And you're like, well, I don't know. I heard $1.2 million in Coral Gables, I'm excited. Don't get excited until you know what they want to do, why they're doing it, and do they absolutely have to do it. That's how you get in trouble. This works good on the buy side. What happens when buyers hear the national news or they watch the local news? They talk about the sky falling. It's a bubble.
You wanna wait?
Well, they could rent. What do you think you'd want to know about buyers?
How motivated are they to buy?
It's no different. Do they absolutely have to buy? Is there a plan B? If their answer is, well, if I can't steal something, I'm going to rent. We're just going to renew our lease. That one goes to your favorite competitor. Literally, why would I want to worry about her? She's going to renew her lease for a year. there are a finite amount of transactions that get done in your market. So you're either going to chase bad things or you're going to give up by not following up on them. So I love what David said about CRM. Do not use it as a crutch to load it up with garbage. If I were coaching you, the first thing I'm going to do is say, show me all your opportunities. It's the Chris Heller, Mike Ferry conversation. What are your five best opportunities? Why are they doing what they're doing? What do they have to do it by? Is there a plan B? Does Jen have a plan B? Well, I don't even know if I have my job in Dallas. We're not sure if we're moving yet. She may not be a very good opportunity. Buyers that want to pay 10, 15% below list because they moved in from out of state or they're moving in from out of state. What if you showed them that in their price range, there were 345 listings in Miami-Dade County? 345, or whatever the number is, big number. This is why you can't just use the neighborhood. Because maybe Jeannie looks at it, and there's 3 sales in the last 90 days. There haven't been that many, but 345 is a pretty good data set. What if the list to sale percentage was 102? Do you think that helps a buyer understand? There might have been some buyers out of the last 345 that thought they were going to buy for 10% off list, but these 345 paid an average of 102. If you were my buyer, I'd say, given that, if we did write an offer at 10% off, and the listing agent knows this, what would you like me to tell them to offer up to their seller to justify where we're at 10% off and the market's at 102%? To have them even consider not just outright rejecting your offer. I'll tell them whatever you'd like me to do, but help me understand how you would help me justify it. They won't.
No, they don't.
Motivated buyer is going to change their tone. But if we don't have good information, we feel like we're always battling. And what do they not do? They don't trust agents. So now I could just be the agent that this is like market's going sideways, shifting, they want to offer 10% off. And what do most agents do? They try and just talk their way through it. Nobody's going to accept a 10% off offer. That's confrontational. What did I do? I said to her, I'll present whatever you'd like, but I'm curious what you'd like me to tell David, who's one of the top listing agents in the market where you're buying, so he can share it with his seller about the fact that 345 of these properties in this price range in the whole county sold for 102%, and you want to buy for 90%. There's nothing in here at 90%. I can do it in a way that she doesn't feel like she's an idiot. I'm not confronting her and saying, there's no way you can buy. Because she may be a great buyer. She may have come from a market, maybe it was the Northeast or somewhere else, Ohio, New Jersey, where it is starting to really shift. And she doesn't know. So it's all about setting expectations and knowing what's going on. So one thing you haven't heard me talk about is local subdivision numbers. The data set is too small. Like if Jeannie pulls the numbers and there's only 3 comps in the last 90 days, is that a data set? What if one of them was a foreclosure or a short sale and it was at 90%? She's going to think she can write for 10% off. And I can show it to her and I can show her the history of the property and maybe say, yeah, there was one out of these 345. Yeah, there's an aberration here. But that is not what's the general trend going on in our market.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So we're talking about market as a whole, like Tampa or Miami-Dade or whatever, and we're giving statistics for that whole entire county. But what if you are trying to say to a seller that your house isn't selling? Don't you need to narrow it down more to that zip code, that area, that neighborhood, and say, okay, this is what's going on in this hot area that everyone wants to be in.
Yeah, you have to show the local comps. But it's important to show them, remember what I talked about? I talked about what's going on overall in that price range. Do we have more buyers than we did 30 days ago, 90 days ago, whatever it is? What's the general trend? And then I'm going to get into the local comps. You absolutely have to do that. Part of the problem is in a hyper-low inventory market, right? I always had plenty of comparables when I was back in the market where 50% of the things were selling because I could show there's 27 active listings. There's 47 active listings in your price range. There might be 17 of them in your neighborhood. These are all the ones that are never going to sell, right? These are the 12 expireds. What happens if you go to look and everybody's looking to buy and there's nothing active? And maybe there's only been 3 properties that have sold, none in that subdivision. You've still got to start from a macro basis. You absolutely have to show the local comparables to a buyer or a seller. Sometime you need to basically think about, it's like what lawyers do that are really good. They know where they're getting to, but instead of just saying, I'm the all-knowing agent, let me build the case. Let me get you to the point where it's going to be crystal clear to you that, because Jeannie had me say this to her. I'm like, we'll go back a year. What's ever sold in this neighborhood? What did it sell for before? Has anything ever expired? Like what? Just show me something.
So
Go out a little farther.
it's like a dual conversation of what you're saying.
And then you got to get to the local numbers.
Yeah, so we.
But what do you do if there's no numbers?
Yeah.
Like you go back and you look in 6 months, it's a hot market, everybody wants to live there, and there's no comps.
And like right now, it's hard because the market changed so much just in 3 months.
Yes.
So I'm looking at trends, I'm like, all right, so the trend is, we don't really have a trend right now because of the rates. So I mean, I don't know what the damn trend is.
Well, I could tell you if I had your data from 90 days ago, I could tell you exactly what's going on in your market. How many buyers were there before?
Sure, but what do we say to our sellers? We're like, yeah, so, 3 months ago, if I would have listed your house, we went like that. Now, it's just akin to a screeching halt, and the only thing I say is, oh, the rates went up, and so,
Great question. Anybody want to take, I know the answer for her. Anybody want to take a swag at it?
I determine motivation. I'll tell you that I rarely listed a house that someone didn't have to sell. Like one of the beginning questions for me whenever I went on a listing or even did it on prospecting, tell me, do you have to sell or want to sell?
sure.
If they said want,
Right. Motivation is important, but so anybody want to take a crack at her? She's giving a general statement that the market has shifted dramatically from where it was 90 days ago.
Well, you can go in the MLS and go 90 to 120 days, and then 60 to 90 days, and then 0 to 30.
You could put a date range in.
Right.
What was the 30-day pending number 90 days ago?
It's almost like you were saying, like start
Right?
macro and then
Right?
go into micro.
If you've got a problem to solve, remember I'm building my case. Like I said, I could go into her market, say, tell me the overall number for the market, how many deals went pending in the 30-day period that started 90 days ago. Go back 90 days and go back another 30 days, right? So I got 120 days to 90 days, and then go from 90 to 60, 60 to 30, and tell me that buyer pool change. You'll have your answer, because you'll know. You'll no longer be saying,
You can give a
it
percentage
just,
then.
well, because you'll know how big the pool was. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we had 127 pendings in the 30-day period measured 90 days ago. Then it went from 130 to 115. It's now 73. Real easy for a seller to connect the dots if I give them the right information. So now you,
What's your response then? Why? Why did it change so much? That's what I'm trying to
It doesn't matter.
down to. But it does.
but I could tell you, if you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you had your loan officer call you, and let's say that you were a buyer that got priced in originally because you started looking in January, and Jen calls you 90 days later and tells you your payment just went up by 50%.
Yeah.
How many of those calls have to occur before the trend I just showed you becomes dramatic? Rising interest rates have caused us to go from 135 to 73 in less than 100 days. That represents this big a drop as a percentage. I never had sellers argue with me, unless, to Anthony's point, they weren't motivated.
that's the only time, it never mattered to me, I'll be honest with you. Because literally, I set the stage so far up front, when they would say, well, Anthony, what happened to the market? It doesn't matter, Bob, you told me you had to sell, right? I'm going to sell your house, let's do what it takes to sell your house. And that's the mindset I've always taken in my business. I literally, if someone told me, no, I do not have to sell, thank you very much, let the competition do it. That's how disciplined it was. I sat in front of a class years ago in New Orleans, and a real estate agent said, Anthony, we don't have the business like you to turn down listings. And I said, you don't have the business that I do because you don't turn down listings.
Right. So think about what I'm not talking about. Months of inventory, right? What's the sale percentage? I'll show that at the local level if I've got good data for it, and there were some actual sales. I could do it. I could show it on a macro basis, how many relative expireds versus solds. But it's that trend line that the MLSs never talk about. They talk about months of inventory. the trend line and what's going on with buyers. And so when I answer you very flippantly, like it just doesn't matter, what the seller wants to hear or the buyer needs to know, because maybe they think they can get things for 10% off list, you can show them, look, here's what's closing. Here's the list of sale on things from now, the list of sale 190 days ago, or whatever the numbers are you're looking at. It's still 100%. Sellers are either holding off now, we still don't have a ton of inventory, or it's gone up. Remember, build your case, but
And
support it.
ratios vary depending on the price point, so you
Yeah.
might have to reflect that, because they might be right on the aspect of properties are selling like at really high values, above listing price, but it could be at a different price point, because now those people can't afford their home, now they're at a lower bracket, you know?
Right.
So your point in interest rate is exactly right. It's
Right.
supply and demand.
Yeah, it's just, there's a number of things that are triggering it. It's consumer confidence, people are worried about inflation, rates are going up. I mean, we're in an economic environment, lack of affordability, driven by.
Greed, because sellers got used to
Well,
pricing.
the other thing that you can show by looking in the numbers is idiot agents still thinking it's the old market because they're anything from a hobbyist agent to a completely clueless one. And, right, Will calls me up and it's like, I'll list it with you, but it's going to be 700,000 and it's worth 600. It screws up. It screws up. The greed piece, it takes a while to wash those things out. I can't tell you when I worked on expired listings, the number of sellers that would tell me what about the comparables that were shown by their listing agent. How many of them do you think that expired out of every 10 would tell me what about comparables?
I'll take it.
What would they tell me?
But it compared to what it used to be.
8 out of 10 would say they never showed me comparables. I told them what I wanted. Yeah, it's very common for expired listings. Yeah. They just,
A lot of agents don't
That is,
even
you know-
look at the research, they just get it as an opportunity to do open houses and attract buyers.
and also, what are they excited about? It's $1.2 million listing in Coral Gables. That's all they care about. Remember what I asked them, what's the motivation and timing and is there a plan B?
One of the numbers that I hate seeing nowadays is the stat that they put out on how many homes reduced their price on the MLS.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not a good stat because you started high as it was already. Because you had
Yeah.
reseller,
I mean,
agent.
Absolutely. I used to track that so I would know, is that going up or down? Right? 'Cause that's another thing that happens. But that's also more lagging than the size of the buyer pool, right? They get a call from Jen, their payment skyrocketed, they can no longer afford it, and they're like, yeah, we're just not buying now. That's going to reflect the next week and fairly quickly in the pendings, whereas David might be fighting me on lowering the price. So I may not see the numbers change quick enough because everybody's digging their heels in on changing prices. If you track it over time, you can start to see price reductions and change. Articles will talk about it. You see it in the national news. They'll try and say that, you know, here's the numbers from Oregon and Washington, and it's an article in Sarasota, Manatee County. It's like, okay, well, this doesn't make any sense, but they still do it, don't they? So you have to know your numbers, or you're just doing what? Guessing? Or you're letting the buyers and the sellers do what? Dictate the terms for the marketplace based on their perception? I used to ask sellers, have you ever asked an agent with a name badge at Publix, if you're in Florida, or a gas station, how's the market? And they would say, yeah, I did that in the last 6 months because they were thinking about selling, right? What did they tell you? Market slowed down, it's a bubble, market's changing. And I would always ask them this, and if this doesn't convince you, like I've done it with probably 30 or 40 people. I've tried it myself at the gas station. Most agents will say some generic statement that has no basis in fact, because it was repeated in their office, or they saw it in a news article or on TV,
You're lucky if it got that far, or they saw it on Instagram.
or they're just guessing.
They saw an Instagram.
And this is why you can do so much more business. Back to the original part of the conversation, you have to get rid of the garbage. You cannot be working with people that are going to drive you frickin' crazy because they're making their lack of motivation and what they want to happen too high of a price, and then they think, who's at fault? Who do they think's at fault? right?
Reputation.
And if you didn't explain the market correctly to them, to get them to make a good decision, it is our fault. Like if I just said, the gas station comment, the market's going sideways, slowing down a little bit, things are starting to sit on the market, I didn't tell anybody anything. Versus there are 37% fewer buyers than there were 90 days ago. Now, compared to the luxury part, that's way worse. That's down by more than 50%. Now, at the lower price points, it's not as bad, but in your price range, this many have sold in the last 6 months, these have expired, that number's starting to come up. We're seeing a ton of price reductions. That's the penalty for going out too high a price. Think about all the expectations I'm setting for a seller. And I can turn the conversation the same way to buyers if I do the same thing. Here's the list of sale. Things are still selling at roughly 100, 102% over these 345 sales in the last 6 months. You can see here there's still very few listings expiring in that same 6-month period. I can build the case and paint the story, but only if I'm actually tracking the numbers. And I didn't make this up. Mike Ferry used to always tell people, and then I'll stop and see if anybody has any specific questions. I could go into any of your markets and beat you within 6 months, not knowing anything about the market. And I took it to heart, and I went and did it in St. Louis. That's why the president of the Board of Realtors called me up screaming at me when the St. Louis Post-Dispatch said, well, we have no need to call you. You guys don't have the answers to what's going on. And they're like, what? And when I started asking the president that, he screamed at me more, because I was asking him, how many expireds are there? How many solds? What's the list of sale percentage? What's the 30-day pending number? What was it 100 days ago? It's like, well, we don't track that. I said, then you don't know what you're talking about. I don't blame them for not calling you. I said, my job is not to make you happy. My job is to close business by representing my clients correctly. You just regurgitate the NAR garbage. They don't call them. You know, NAR puts the press releases out a quarter late. Doesn't help anybody. All right, what questions do you have before I get the hook from David and get on to the next thing?
Do you get referrals when you send them away? Referrals?
No.
You just send them away?
No, because I took Shane Sauer's business at RE/MAX down by 43%. He didn't close any of them. He had a ton of expires. His expires were double a year later.
My question would be, are you gonna give us like a real live
I've got,
presentation?
well, David and I will talk about it. I've sent him the spreadsheet. I don't have, I can go through numbers on the spreadsheet so you can see what it looks like in an actual market. It is legitimately, because we did this, and David did it on a mastermind call on a Monday night, and then we went through the numbers in Sarasota, Manatee. And I have agents that are less than 12 months in the business that a week later were using this with sellers to get them to price properties correctly. It's a real simple framework. So maybe tomorrow we can take 5 minutes, we'll bring up one of these spreadsheets. It's not going to be populated with your numbers from one of your MLSs, but you'll see how it lays out, and I can tell you what I would be talking about with a seller, and then we've got the template. If you guys want to pull it out of Stellar or your MLS for Miami Realtors, it's not hard to do. My suggestion is do it once or twice yourself, and then just give it to a VA or somebody else that has access or an assistant. It took our assistant less than 15 minutes a week to pull it. All you're doing is changing the price range for each of the components. Go to the next one, you know, the 30-day pending number for every price point, and then the spreadsheet populates everything in it. You can tell.
I mean, I don't know how that your MLS works, but the Miami MLS, we can do safe searches and everything. I can literally set up everything exactly how I want it and just click on it and I'll have it completed.
Yeah, it doesn't take very long. So yeah, I'll before we'll wrap up this weekend, and I don't have access to the MLSs, so I can't populate your data in there, but
That's fine, at least, if we could take 5 minutes tomorrow or 10 minutes.
and just go over and I would explain to you how I would go through these numbers.
You know?
Just don't overcomplicate what you're doing. Know your numbers so you can actually explain to a buyer or a seller what's really going on in the market. Yes?
So what is your definition of great lead and versus the garbage leads? Because I need to know what I need to throw away.
Sure. Motivation and timing, and is there a plan B? It's that simple, right? Remember Chris Heller had 5 opportunities, and our fictitious Will had a boatload of them. And Chris closed 10 times as much business. And the conclusion that Mike walked through everybody was Chris throws away like 70 or 80% of what he comes in contact with. Because it's not, you can't go on an infinite number of appointments or work with an infinite number of people. So he's hyper-focused on having so many opportunities that he can pick the best of the best. And what was most instructive, to my point, was Mike tied it down and said, Chris, tell me about the 5 leads. What are they doing? Why are they doing it? When do they need to do it by? And do they have any other option? He knew all of that on the fly. And Mike said, where's the information on it? Pulled out a card with all the information for the 5 people. He asked the other agent that. And when the agent didn't know the motivation and timing, Mike did what I just described. Well, tell me about the leads. Price point, the area, something about the subdivision, why it would be an awesome listing. Don't do that. You've got to know why they're doing what they're doing, when they need to do it by. And if it doesn't flush through, it's fine to have some leads in the future. Somebody may tell you, we're not doing anything until February next year. It's a great lead. Follow up on it, but go get more, because you need leads now that you're nurturing that are motivated, that do have a deadline, and they don't have a plan B. So if you don't have enough of them, you're going to chase the wrong leads because you don't have enough to work on. I can tell you, when I asked Chris, what happened when Mike forced you to do this when you started? He said, when I didn't have my cell phone and I had my dialer and my list, it was super uncomfortable because I realized how much I was effing off and doing other things. And it took him like a day, and he was like, all right, I can talk to a lot of people because I don't have anything else I can do.
Did Chris use a chess clock? Was he the one using a chess clock? Okay.
He did for a while. Where he basically did the chess clock where you're on or you're off for the 2 players, but he did one side to show when he was dialing versus not dialing. And then after a 3-hour period, he could see how much time he was doing each activity. Most people don't need that, but yeah, Anthony.
It's to set your inner tone.
Well, it's David's point of write everything down you're doing and then highlight the ones that are dollar productive activities versus I'm just messing around. I was messing around plenty before I got on track. It's human nature. I was following up on leads. I was doing this. I was doing that. I got to the point where a couple of people that came to shadow me would ask some good questions. How many people do you talk to per day? How many people do you follow up with? How many people, right? And I had 3 people tell me after they left the first day of the 2 days they were going to shadow me, you talk to more people in a day than we probably talk to in 10 days to 14 days. There's only 20 working days if you're working during the week. Do you think I can beat every one of them? Because I was doing it every day. And they asked me for somebody was mentioning a to-do list. They asked me, what's your list? It was only dollar productive activities because anything else. They're like, do you work on the weekends? I was a listing agent. No, I'll negotiate an offer if I have an offer or an inspection. And eventually I gave that away. They're like, do you work late at night? I'm like, I even have gotten to the point where my listing appointments, 8 out of 10 of them are in the afternoon. It works great to tell the sellers you want to look at their property the same way buyers are, during the day. So I don't go to people's houses at 8 o'clock at night because I framed it up what they want to do. So most people think, they're like, remember the comment, you don't look like you do anything. I was only doing a very small set of things and an awful lot of it. All right, who's got any other questions, and I'll wrap up. Nobody? All right, but we will go through the spreadsheet.
That's awesome.
All right.
All right, I'm messing around with my schedule a little bit. Mei Ling, I'm gonna have you come up next.
Yes, I have